It was a busy Friday evening at Dario's Diner, a small restaurant in the heart of the city. The sound of clinking dishes, sizzling pans, and hurried footsteps filled the air. Among the noise, a young man named Ethan stood quietly behind the counter, wiping glasses and refilling orders. He had been working here for almost 3 years, dreaming that one day his hard work might be noticed. But tonight was different. The restaurant was packed, customers were impatient, and stress filled the kitchen like smoke. Ethan moved quickly, trying to keep up, but no matter how fast he worked, it was never enough for his boss, Mr. Dario, a man known for his sharp tongue and colder heart. "Ethan! You call this service?" Mr. Dario shouted, throwing a dirty plate onto the counter. Ethan froze. I'm sorry, sir. I'll fix it right away." "Sorry? You've been saying that for 3 years. Maybe you should stop dreaming and start working like the others," Dario snapped, his voice echoing through the diner. The customers turned to look. Ethan felt the heat rush to his face. He wanted to disappear. But instead, he picked up the plate, cleaned it, and returned to his work quietly, without a word. That was how he always handled it. He had no choice. He needed this job. But deep down, something changed that night. For the first time, Ethan felt something burn inside him, not anger, but resolve. He didn't know it yet, but this was the start of his unexpected war. Later that night, when the restaurant finally closed, Ethan sat alone near the kitchen door. The smell of burnt oil still filled the air. His hands were tired, and his back ached, but his mind wouldn't stop replaying Dario's words. "Stop dreaming." Those 2 words hit harder than any insult. Dreaming was all he had. His parents had passed away when he was just 16, and since then, life had been a battle. He worked odd jobs just to survive, never having the chance to study or build a future. But every night, when he looked at the restaurant's big signboard Dario's Diner, he dreamed of owning something like it one day. A place where workers were respected. A place where no one shouted. He smiled bitterly. "How stupid," he whispered to himself. "Who am I to dream that big?" Just then, his friend Liam, another worker, came out from the kitchen. "You okay, man? I saw what happened." Ethan shrugged. "Same as always. I'm fine." Liam sat beside him. "You shouldn't let him talk to you like that." Ethan looked up. "And do what? Quit? I've got rent to pay. I'll just take it, like always." Liam sighed. "One day, Ethan, one day you'll make him regret it." Ethan smiled faintly, but inside, he didn't believe it. Yet those words planted a tiny seed in his heart, one that would soon grow into something powerful. The next morning, Dario called everyone for a meeting. He stood in front of the staff with his usual arrogance. "Listen up. Business is slow, and I can't afford lazy workers. From now on, every mistake will cost you in your pay. And Ethan," he said, smirking, "you better start thinking of another job. You're too slow for my kitchen." Everyone went silent. Ethan stood there, fists tight. He wanted to shout back, to tell Dario how unfair he was. But he didn't. He just nodded and walked away. That was the moment, the breaking point. After work, he went home to his small, one-room apartment. The walls were cracked, and the lights flickered. He sat at his small table and stared at an old notebook, one he used to write his goals in. It had been collecting dust for years. He opened it again. On the first page, it said, "One day, I'll build something of my own." Ethan took a deep breath and whispered, "Maybe it's time." He didn't know how or when. But he made himself a promise that night. He would never let anyone treat him like he was nothing. He would learn, grow, and fight quietly. The war had begun, even if no one else could see it. Weeks turned into months. Ethan started saving every small tip he got. He stopped wasting time and began watching online videos about restaurant management and cooking. Whenever the restaurant closed, he stayed behind to practice recipes on leftover ingredients. He wrote down everything: the flavors, the mistakes, the lessons. And even when Dario insulted him again and again, Ethan smiled silently. Because now, every insult was fuel. Every "you can't do it" became his reason to prove he could. He wasn't just a restaurant worker anymore. He was a fighter in his own quiet war, a war not fought with anger, but with patience, effort, and belief. That was how it all began. No one noticed. No one cared. But 10 years later, everyone would. Months passed, and Ethan's quiet war continued. Every morning, he woke up before the sun, walked to Dario's diner, and worked like nothing had changed. But inside him, everything had changed. He was no longer just a worker, he was a learner. A fighter. He watched everything carefully. How food was prepared, how customers reacted, what made them happy or angry. He studied Dario too, not with hate, but with curiosity. He noticed how Dario managed bills, suppliers, and staff. Every small detail became a lesson. At night, when everyone else was asleep, Ethan stayed awake with his old phone and a cracked notebook. He watched cooking tutorials, read about management, and wrote down every new idea. His room became a mini classroom, walls covered with notes like: learn Italian recipes. Customer service equals respect. Never treat workers like machines. He didn't have money, degrees, or support, but he had patience. One evening, while closing the diner, Dario noticed Ethan writing something in his notebook. "What are you scribbling now?" he asked mockingly. Ethan looked up. "Just learning some new recipes." Dario laughed loudly. "Learning? You'll never make it in this business, kid. You don't have what it takes." Ethan stayed quiet. He had stopped arguing long ago. He just smiled slightly and said, "Maybe. But I can try." That single line irritated Dario more than any argument ever could. He turned away, muttering, "Hopeless dreamer." But what Dario didn't know was that dreamers never stay hopeless for long. A few weeks later, fate opened a small door. A new restaurant opened across the street, a modern cafe that became the talk of the town. They needed part-time helpers for weekends, and Ethan saw a chance. Without telling Dario, he applied and got the job. He started working double shifts, mornings at Dario's diner, evenings at the cafe. It was exhausting. Sometimes he slept barely 3 hours a night. But this cafe was different. The owner, Mrs. Claire, was kind and respectful. She often noticed Ethan's interest in learning and said one day, "You have potential, Ethan. Don't waste it being someone else's shadow." Those words stuck in his mind. For the first time, someone saw his worth. At the cafe, he learned about modern kitchens, online reviews, and business trends. He observed how teamwork and kindness created a positive energy. It was the opposite of Dario's world, and Ethan loved it. Slowly, he started to build confidence. He even began creating his own small dishes, sandwiches and sauces, testing them after closing time. One day, Mrs. Claire tried one of his recipes and smiled. "This is really good," she said. "You could sell this someday." Ethan's heart raced. Maybe, just maybe, he could. But good things don't come without challenges. One morning, Dario found out that Ethan was working elsewhere. "You think you can play smart with me?" Dario shouted in front of everyone. "If you want to work here, you work only here. You're fired." Ethan stood still. His heart sank, but he didn't beg this time. He looked straight at Dario and said calmly, "Thank you for teaching me everything, especially how not to treat people." He removed his apron and walked out. For the first time, his steps felt light, like freedom. That was the day he lost his job. But it was also the day his new life began. Without a job, Ethan struggled again. Bills piled up, savings ran out, and nights became colder. But he didn't give up. He started cooking small meals at home and selling them to local workers. He used social media to promote his food, taking pictures with his cheap phone and writing kind, simple captions like, "Made with love, served with respect." Slowly, people began to notice. A few loyal customers started ordering daily. They loved his humble behavior and homemade taste. His little business began to grow one meal at a time. Every time he felt tired, he remembered Dario's words, "You'll never make it." Those words became fuel to work harder. One night, as he packed food boxes, he whispered, "I'm not there yet, but I will be." 2 years later, Ethan's home kitchen turned into a small food truck. He painted it himself, named it The Honest Spoon, and added a slogan under it: "Food with respect." He parked it near offices, smiled at every customer, and treated his small team like family. He paid them fairly, listened to them, and encouraged them to dream bigger. And soon, people noticed not just the food but the kindness behind it. Videos of the Honest Spoon guy went viral on social media. People loved his story. Local papers featured him as the worker who never gave up. Ethan didn't feel famous, he just felt grateful. One evening, as he counted the day's earnings, he saw a familiar face walk by. It was Mr. Dario, older now, tired, and still managing his diner, which looked emptier than ever. Their eyes met for a moment. Dario looked away quickly. Ethan smiled softly and whispered, "The war isn't over yet, but I'm winning it my way." The rise had begun. He had no idea what was waiting ahead. Because destiny was preparing something even bigger. It had been almost 10 years since Ethan walked out of Dario's diner. 10 years of hard work, sleepless nights, and quiet battles. But those years changed everything. The Honest Spoon was no longer just a food truck. It had grown into a small chain of cozy restaurants spread across the city. Each one carried the same message: respect is the main ingredient. Customers loved it. Workers admired it. And Ethan, the once humiliated restaurant worker, had become a quiet symbol of perseverance. But even with all the success, he never forgot where it all began: that small diner, that cruel laughter, and those words that once broke him. "You'll never make it." One cloudy afternoon, Ethan sat in his office, going through papers. His manager, Liam, yes, the same old friend from the diner, entered with a smile. "Boss, you're not going to believe this," Liam said, holding a newspaper. Ethan looked up. "What's up?" Liam grinned. "Dario's diner is for sale. The owner's retiring. The place is closing next month." For a moment, Ethan froze. His pen slipped from his hand. "Dario's diner," he whispered. The name felt heavy, full of memories and pain. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. He had dreamed of this moment once, the day he would finally prove himself. But now that it was real, he didn't know how to feel. Liam noticed the silence and said softly, "You could buy it, Ethan. You deserve it. It's poetic justice." Ethan smiled faintly. "Maybe. But I don't want revenge, Liam. I just want peace." For the next few days, Ethan couldn't stop thinking about it. At night, he walked past the diner, now old and quiet, paint peeling off, lights dim. Through the window, he saw Dario sitting alone, head down, staring at papers. He looked nothing like the powerful man Ethan once feared. He looked tired. Beaten by time. Still, Ethan felt something stir inside him. A voice whispered, "It's time to return." The next morning, Ethan made a decision. He called his lawyer and said, "I want to buy Dario's diner." The process moved fast. Within a few weeks, the deal was done. The papers were signed. The keys were his. But Ethan didn't celebrate. He simply drove to the diner, parked outside, and stepped out quietly. The same door he once walked through as a humiliated worker, he now opened as the new owner. Inside, everything looked the same: old tables, faded menu, the smell of grease. Memories rushed back like waves. The corner where he used to stand, the counter where Dario once shouted at him, the plate that broke near his feet. Ethan took a deep breath. "It's all mine now," he said softly. Not with pride but with peace. Just then, he heard footsteps. "Ethan!" He turned. It was Dario, older, thinner, with grey hair and tired eyes. For a moment, both men just stood there, the air heavy with history. Dario broke the silence. "So, it's true. You bought the diner?" Ethan nodded. "Yes." Dario forced a laugh. "Well, congratulations. Looks like you proved me wrong after all." Ethan smiled gently. "I didn't do it to prove you wrong. I did it to prove myself right." Dario looked down, ashamed. I wasn't a good boss, Ethan. I said terrible things. I thought shouting made people respect me. I was wrong." Ethan listened quietly. The same man who once humiliated him now stood before him, broken. He could easily have humiliated him back. Fired him. Insulted him. But he didn't. Instead, Ethan said calmly, "I'm reopening this place next month. I want to turn it into something new, a place where people feel valued. But I don't need old habits here." Dario looked confused. "Are you saying I'm fired?" Ethan nodded slowly. "Yes. But not because I hate you. Because I've learned something you never did. Sometimes losing a job can teach you how to be a better person. It did for me." Dario didn't argue. He just lowered his head and walked out. As he left, Ethan whispered quietly, "Goodbye, sir. Thank you, for starting my journey." A few weeks later, the diner reopened under a new name. The Second Chance Cafe. Ethan invited all his old workers, even new ones from his other branches. The walls were repainted bright and warm. Photos of his team hung everywhere with a message painted near the door. "Everyone deserves respect. Everyone deserves a second chance." Customers flooded in. The energy was different, alive, welcoming, kind. It wasn't just a restaurant anymore. It was a symbol of change. One afternoon, while serving tables, Ethan saw a familiar figure outside the window: Dario again. He stood quietly, watching, his eyes filled with a mix of regret and pride. Ethan walked outside and smiled. "Want to come in for a coffee?" Ethan asked. Dario hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Only if you'll sit with me." They sat together, two men from two different times. For the first time, there was no anger, only understanding. Dario looked around and said softly, "You turned this place into something beautiful, Ethan." Ethan smiled. "No, sir. Life did. It just needed time." That day, something inside Ethan healed. The war was over. Not because he defeated his enemy, but because he had forgiven him and won himself. Months passed after Ethan reopened the Second Chance Cafe. The place was thriving, filled with laughter, good food, and warmth. Customers came not only for the meals but for the story behind them. They saw in Ethan something rare, a man who turned pain into purpose. But success never comes without new challenges. Life had one last lesson waiting for him, a test he never expected. One rainy evening, Ethan was finishing paperwork when the cafe door suddenly opened. A man walked in, drenched, shivering slightly. Ethan looked up and froze. It was Dario. He looked weaker now, clothes old, eyes tired. There was no pride left in his posture, just quiet sadness. "Ethan," Dario said softly, "I'm sorry to come like this. I didn't know where else to go." Ethan stood up, surprised. "What happened?" Dario sighed deeply. "After selling the diner, I tried starting a small food stall, but it failed. I lost everything. I'm staying in a cheap motel now. I was wondering if... He hesitated. If you could give me a job. Any job. The cafe fell silent. The sound of rain filled the gap between them. Liam, who was standing nearby, whispered, "Ethan, you don't have to." But Ethan raised a hand to stop him. He looked at Dario for a long moment. The same man who once mocked him, who made him feel worthless, now stood before him, asking for help. Life had come full circle. Ethan took a slow breath. "Sit down, Mr. Dario." They sat across from each other, the past and the present sharing one table. Dario looked down. "I don't expect forgiveness. I need to survive. I'll clean tables, wash dishes, anything." Ethan didn't answer immediately. He could see the pain in Dario's eyes, the same pain he once carried. Finally, he said quietly, "You once told me I'd never make it. You fired me, insulted me in front of everyone. Do you remember?" Dario nodded. "I remember every word. And I regret them every day." Ethan looked away for a moment, then back. "Back then, you taught me how cruel people can be. But life taught me something even more important: how powerful forgiveness is." He stood up and said gently, "Come tomorrow morning. I'll give you a job. Not as a boss, not as a worker, but as a man getting a second chance." Dario's eyes widened. You mean it?" Ethan smiled softly. "Yes. Everyone deserves another start. You taught me that the hard way." The next day, Dario arrived early. He worked quietly, cleaning tables, serving coffee, helping in the kitchen. He never complained, never raised his voice. The staff was shocked at first. The same man who once shouted at others was now humble, polite, even kind. One afternoon, Liam whispered to Ethan, "Are you sure this is a good idea? After everything he did?" Ethan replied simply, "If I punish him, I become him. If I forgive him, I become free." Weeks passed, and something amazing happened. Dario began to change. He started smiling more, guiding younger workers, sharing advice. He didn't act like a boss, he acted like a mentor. One day, Ethan overheard Dario talking to a new waiter who had made a mistake. Instead of shouting, Dario said kindly, "Don't worry, son. We learn more from mistakes than from success." Ethan stood by the doorway, smiling quietly. The man who once humiliated him was now teaching others kindness. It felt like life had rewritten its own story. But soon, another test arrived. One morning, Ethan received a notice: a new luxury restaurant chain wanted to buy out the entire block, including the Second Chance Cafe. The offer was huge, millions of dollars. Enough to expand across the country. His team celebrated. "Ethan, this is your chance to go national," Liam said. But Ethan stayed quiet. His eyes went to Dario, who was wiping tables nearby. If Ethan sold the cafe, everyone would lose their jobs, including Dario. It wasn't just a building anymore. It was home. A symbol. A second chance for many. That night, Ethan sat alone in the empty cafe. He looked at the sign on the wall, the one that said, "Everyone deserves respect. Everyone deserves a second chance." He smiled sadly. "If I sell this place, I'll be selling my own story." The next morning, he called the company and said, "Thank you for the offer. But this cafe isn't for sale." Liam was shocked. "Ethan, are you sure? That was a life-changing deal." Ethan replied with a peaceful smile. "My life already changed the day I chose forgiveness over money." When Dario found out, he couldn't hold back his tears. He said softly, "You saved me, Ethan, again." Ethan laughed gently. "No, sir. You saved yourself when you chose to change." That night, as the cafe closed, Ethan looked around. The lights glowed softly, the air smelled of fresh bread, and laughter came from the kitchen. He thought of his past, the pain, the humiliation, the struggle, and smiled. The boy who once cleaned tables now owned hearts. The man who once hated him now respected him. And the world that once ignored him now admired him. But most of all, Ethan had forgiven. And in doing so, he had finally won the real war. The sun rose softly over the city, its light touching the golden letters on the cafe's sign. The Second Chance Cafe. Inside, the morning routine had already begun. The smell of fresh coffee filled the air, laughter echoed from the kitchen, and customers greeted each other like family. Ethan stood by the counter, watching quietly, a small smile on his face. It had been 3 years since he bought the old diner and turned it into this place of hope. And in those 3 years, it had become more than just a cafe. It had become a home for people who once lost everything. Dario, now older but peaceful, stood beside Ethan, wiping the counter with care. He was no longer the harsh boss from the past. His words were gentle, his tone kind. People respected him not for power, but for humility. "You've done something special here, Ethan," Dario said softly. Ethan smiled. "We've done it together." Dario chuckled. "You could have become rich if you'd sold this place. Instead, you chose peace." Ethan looked out the window at the rising Sunday. "Peace is richer than money, sir." News of the Second Chance Cafe had spread far beyond the city. Social media was full of videos showing the cafe's story. The worker who bought the place that once fired him. The boss who found forgiveness instead of hate. Soon, journalists began visiting, calling Ethan's journey the real hope story. People came from different cities not just to eat, but to feel the spirit of the place. One afternoon, a group of young students came to interview Ethan. "Sir," one of them asked shyly, "what made you forgive him?" "After everything he did." Ethan paused for a moment before replying. "Because hate chains you to the past. Forgiveness sets you free to build the future." They wrote it down, eyes wide, inspired. It was a simple line, but it carried years of pain, growth, and peace. As months passed, Ethan started a small foundation called the Honest Heart Project. It offered free food and job training for people who had been fired, rejected, or struggling. The ones who just needed a second chance, like he once did. Every week, he would visit small towns, sharing his story in schools and shelters. He told people, "I wasn't special. I was just stubborn enough to believe that pain can become power if you keep going." People cried, clapped, and smiled because they saw themselves in his story. One evening, after a long day, Ethan sat alone in the cafe. The lights were dim, and the last customers had left. He looked around. The same walls that once witnessed his humiliation now echoed laughter and hope. He whispered to himself, "This was never about revenge, it was always about becoming better." Just then, Dario walked in, holding 2 cups of coffee. "Still working late, huh?" he said. Ethan smiled. Some habits never die. They sat together near the window, watching cars pass under the streetlights. After a while, Dario spoke quietly. "You know, Ethan, when I lost everything, I thought my life was over. But you gave me a chance to start again. You taught me what real strength looks like." Ethan looked at him and said, "No, sir. You taught me what failure looks like and how it can change a person for good." Both men laughed softly. The tension of the past was gone, replaced by peace. The next morning, something unexpected happened. A well-known TV host featured the Second Chance Cafe on national television. The story went viral. Within hours, thousands of people shared it online, calling it the most heartwarming real-life story of forgiveness. Messages poured in from people who reconnected with old friends, forgave family members, or found the courage to try again. The cafe's message had reached millions. Ethan's eyes filled with tears as he read one message. Because of your story, I forgave my father after 10 years. Thank you for reminding me that love still wins. He put the phone down, closed his eyes, and whispered. This is the real victory. Years later, the Second Chance Cafe became a chain not of restaurants, but of hope centers around the country. Each one carried the same slogan. Respect first. Kindness always. Ethan rarely talked about money or fame. He talked about gratitude, struggle, and the power of patience. When people asked him how he kept going through all the pain, he always said, "Because I decided that my story would not end in bitterness, it would end in light." One evening, standing outside his cafe as the sun set, Ethan watched a young waiter clean the tables just like he once did. The boy accidentally dropped a plate and looked terrified. Before Ethan could move, Dario walked up to the boy, placed a hand on his shoulder, and said kindly, "Don't worry, son. We all break something before we learn how to serve right." Ethan smiled quietly. That one small moment told him everything. The cycle of cruelty had ended, replaced by kindness. He looked up at the orange sky, took a deep breath, and whispered, "The war is over. Love won." And as the lights of the Second Chance Cafe glowed through the night, its message spread beyond walls and cities, reminding everyone that no matter how broken you are, you can always rebuild. You can always forgive. And you can always rise again.